Hi there. Travel and Things present In Conversation With. I'm David Batsoff and I'm your host, and joining me today all the way from Nairobi is Jonathan Scott. Jonathan, how are you doing? It's been a while. 2016 was the last time we saw each other.
And look how the world has changed.
It has indeed. The only thing that hasn't changed is Sacred Nature, which is the book that we originally spoke about. And now we're talking about Sacred Nature 2.
And the reason is, David, that Sacred Nature 1, the focus of it was the place we call the last place on earth, the Masai Mara, Kenya, the Tanzania in Serengeti National Park in Tanzania. So the Mara Serengeti, 25,000 square kilometers of extraordinary wilderness, the land of the Great Migration and of big cats. And that book focused, we call it Sacred Nature, Life's Eternal Dance. It focused on the extraordinary rhythms of nature, the way the ecosystem functions so beautifully until we come along and mess with it. Now, so that was Africa based and based around the area that we've spent the last 40 plus years documenting with our books, television series, Big Cat Diary, now Big Cat Tales on television.
Do you think do you think that Big Cat Diaries has enabled you to do work like this because people know you and they know your credentials?
And without any question, it opens so many doors. I mean, in the UK alone, at the height of its popularity, you were getting, just in the UK, 7 million viewers. You know, it was competing with the soap operas. It was a huge success. And in fact, you can still go onto YouTube and see clips. And we've managed to reinvent it as Big Cat Tales independently with a great friend from Australia, Abraham Joff, and that's now on Animal Planet. So, you know, the content and the area is, you know, it is no question, it's the best place to be if you're a wildlife photographer. The reason for Sacred Nature 2 is because, as Angie said, what we want to do, and so it's Sacred Nature 2, reconnecting people to our planet, because our belief is, with so many people now, 50% of the world, 60% living in urban areas, a lot of people have begun to believe they can live without nature. But they can't.
No.
It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter whether you think our technology is so clever, it can provide you with everything. Where does our technology come from? It comes from mining the resources of the natural environment. So we want to reconnect people to nature. And secondly, we wanted to do it globally. So Sacred Nature 2, actually, instead of just being Africa and the African savanna, it's now savannas, forests, deserts, mountains, water, and the polar regions. And so in a sense, and tigers. Look at the cover.
I know. Just as a matter of interest, what cameras are you, I take it you're using Canon, but what lenses have you and Angie got on those two monsters?
Okay, so if you look there, I've got my hand around a fantastic lens in terms of versatility, which is a Canon 200 to 400 millimeter zoom, but David, an extra little element. It's got a built-in times 1.4 extender.
Oh, okay.
You get it? So now my 200 400 becomes a 200. That makes it, if you add the 1.4 to the 200 to 400, you've now got a 280 to 560. So it's almost a 60 mm lens. And the f-stop, f4, doesn't change. You don't have to take the lens off the camera to put the extender on, so no dust. And then the lens Angie's got is a 600 millimeter, but quite often it's an 800.
Oh, wow. And the f-stop on that?
So the 600 is f4, and on the 800 is 5.6.
Yeah, because one day they'll make an 800 f2.8, which will weigh about 1,000 kilos, and it'll cost you $1 gazillion.
Okay, I'm so glad you mentioned that, because just for a little, you know, for the technical people, guess what? It's all about mirrorless cameras now. I'm sure you know that.
Yep.
So Canon is right up to their elbows in the mirrorless genre. And so because these new mirrorless cameras you know, their ISO capability, their ability to allow you to shoot
I
in
know.
very low light conditions without impacting hugely in creating grainy, noisy images. Funny you should say one day they'll make an 800 f4. No, you know what they're doing? They've just brought out an 800 f11. Now, in the old days, you would say, oh my God, that's way too slow. You know, you're not going to let in you can't let in enough light. What they're saying is, because they don't need to give you a great big f2.8 aperture, an 800 f11 for these mirrorless cameras, that new one, it's not expensive. Two, it's light. It's
Yeah.
incredibly light. And because you can push your ISO settings up, you don't need to invest thousands of dollars in giving you a bigger aperture, a wider aperture to let light in. You let the digital sensor do it.
Yeah. And you use that with a full frame camera with no
Yes.
cropped sensor, and
Oh,
my goodness
oh,
me.
it's unbelievable. Yeah.
Yeah.
So the new Canon mirrorless sort of pro camera is the R5, and again, the ISO, I mean, it goes to ridiculous levels. You know, it's like what, you know, if we used to think ISO 400 was pushing it,
Yeah.
well, this is now ISO 120,000.
I know, it's ridiculous. I look at my first film camera, and as you say, what we called back in the day ASA rather than
Yeah.
ISO.
Yes. Yes.
200 was, I think we used to use a 120 film,
Yes.
which was about the top of the range. If you went to 400, you were going into territory that fools fear to tread in.
I know, absolutely, because it would look like newsprint under a microscope. It would look so grainy. You know, the image would look really crappy. But
Yeah.
these days, no, that they've cracked the light gathering ability of the sensor, which allows you to use, as I say, an 800 f11
Yeah.
and still actually let in the light. You know, you can still bring in enough light through the f11 onto that sensor, rated up to sort of 4,000, 6,000, 10,000 ISO, and it's so sharp. I mean, these lenses are phenomenal.
But now, Jonathan, I know when I travel, and I have a 560 that sometimes, f5.6 that sometimes goes with me. If you get on a plane with that, you've got to buy a seat for the thing. It's okay if you're in the Mara and you're driving there and you can fill your vehicle with all of this camera gear. How do you choose camera gear when you're going to destinations like India or the polar regions and you're limited, I take it somewhat, to weight?
Okay, so that's a very, very good question, because one of the things we've learned is never, ever, doesn't matter about all these fancy Pelican cases, you know, for the big black boxes that the big pro videographers use and they put into the hold. We never put our camera equipment into the hold. So like you say, how do you get it onto the plane? I'll tell you. And what part of it I've just been talking about with that, you know, the new Canon RF lenses. So the 500 f8 and the 800 f11, they're lightweight. So you can literally put those in a rucksack. And secondly, and this is a real trick, I have a camera jacket which I never actually wear, because if I did, I'd look like Michelin Man. And it's got 4 pockets on the front in which I have 4 camera bodies. And on the back of the jacket, it's got a zip up along the back.
Yeah.
And and this is another, now here's another beautiful lens that they brought out for these mirrorless. It's a 100 to 500 millimeter zoom. Now you think about it. If I'm going to India and I can carry this on because it's light. I've got a 100 to 500. I've got either a 600 or an 800 as my big lens, but I've got the 100 to 500. I can actually not even take a big lens, take the 100 to 500 with a 1.4 extender.
Yeah,
There you
that's
go,
the
you've got
trick.
the long end. And then as a choice for a zoom lens, wide angle, there's a lovely image stabilized 24 to 105. And that is the other key thing. These days, you have to buy lenses with image stabilization.
Yeah.
You don't want to don't take a tripod. You don't need to.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. My go-to lens is a 50 to 500 that has traveled all over the world with me.
Yes.
And then I normally take I think I've got a 15 to 34 wide
Yeah,
angle or
lovely.
a 10 to 20,
Yeah,
which takes
beautiful.
care of the landscapes and sort of hotel rooms and things like that.
Yeah. And the trick, David, with the camera jacket is you can unzip the sleeves,
Yeah.
and then what I do is I don't put it on. I carry it looped through. I pull
Through
it
the
up onto my
armhole.
shoulder. Yes, and then I've never ever been stopped. Okay, security, their eyes might pop open and say, "Wow, you got a lot of camera gear." They can look at it, but they
Yeah,
never say to me, sorry, you can't carry that on."
yeah.
They never say it.
So, is volume two already available, or is this still in the process of being done? Because I should imagine looking at volume one or looking at Sacred Nature, the first book, this is not a book that gets thrown together over a weekend and 4 cups of coffee and a beer.
No, this has consumed us. The images come from date back 40 years. A lot of them are much more recent, but they're everything from Africa, India, Ethiopia, East Africa, the polar regions, the Maldives. We cover every continent and every location, not every location, but we cover every landscape.
Mm.
And so what we've done is, and I mean, as I think I said to you earlier, there's always opportunity where it can appear to be a disaster. When COVID, so since March last year, we haven't left the house on safari.
Right.
We've been locked down. We haven't left. I'm 72, Angie's 68. Angie has lupus. So she's got an immune issue, and we have to be particularly careful.
Right.
But what it meant is, instead of sucking our thumb and feeling sorry for ourselves, we've said, great, we've created this book with our son and with our his fiance David. Our son designed both books, and he and
And
Tori, they designed the Kickstarter campaign.
yeah.
And so this last year has been putting together this book. And to answer your question, it will be in the shops and online from August 2021, August this year. But there's a Kickstarter campaign now where people can get it. It's an $80 book. It's an amazing value for that money.
Yeah.
And on the Kickstarter, it's going for $60. So you can order it now.
I have to say, if it emulates the first book in any way, specifically your son's work when it comes to graphic
Yeah.
design,
Yes.
it is a book, and I said this to you when I interviewed you in 2016. It is a book that you can leave as an heirloom to your family, because it's one of those books that you can page through, yes, but you'll page through it very carefully. It's not a book that you want to break the spine of. It's a coffee table. It weighs 3 kilos. So
Yes.
it's not a coffee table book. It's a book that can be used as a coffee table. Put 4 legs underneath it, like get something from IKEA. It's cheap and nasty. Put the book on the top, cover it with a laminate, and you've got the most awesome coffee table that you can both read and use to put your coffee on.
And you could also use it as a deterrent if you had an intruder in the house
You
and
could
you took a
indeed.
step towards them with the book raised above your head. If you could lift it, then you would definitely. No, it's a beautiful book, and I think.
But I want to know, and I think I've asked this of many people, many authors before. They always talk of coffee table books. What if you don't drink coffee? What if you're only a tea drinker? Is there something called a tea table book?
Yeah, I suppose it must be. What would we call it? Postmodern, or I mean, my granny drank tea, and she
Yeah,
wouldn't even. Coffee would have been out of a tin and certainly not freshly brewed.
yeah,
Tea was the drink of choice, and I think yes, it's an interesting thing, isn't it, coffee table? But it's interesting you mentioned that as a genre, coffee table, because there's 15,000 words in the book, and we hope that people read them in conjunction with the story and the inspiration that the pictures generate in your mind, thinking, what an amazing world. We can't let this place disappear. I mean,
yeah.
look at this image. Look, this is Angie. And I'll take a guess with this. This was probably either with her 600 mil, because you can see fairly shallow depth of field.
Mm.
And so it was probably early morning. And, you know, we talk about, as photographers, the golden hour,
Yeah.
the first hour in the morning and the last hour in the evening, when the sun's still there, but it's soft, saturates the colors. Well, let me tell you something. The really, really golden hour is 10 minutes.
Yep.
So the first 10 minutes from when the sun pops out, we are like headless chickens, because that's why we're out before, way before the sun is up, because we need to find these lands before the sun is up.
Yeah.
And so we're in position. And then, of course, you're just desperate for the sun to come up. But I mean, just look at that line. And
It
of
is
course, this is the thing. Angie always, you know, my background was zoology. And so when I got into photography, I was more looking to record behavior. I was fascinated by the behavior. But what Angie was always an artist. She understood light, and you will know yourself as a photographer, the great light, the moody atmospheric light is when you have it coming from the side or from behind, side lit or backlit. I unfortunately used to look for the sun and have it straight over my shoulder. Well, that's front lit and it's flat. Even an elephant will look as flat as a pancake.
Yeah.
You
But
need to get some modeling.
yeah, you
I can,
say the 10 minutes. I hear what you're saying, because often when I'm out on a game drive or on a safari,
yeah,
and people sort of go ooh are about the sun, it's from when you see the top 16th of the sun until it's clear of the horizon. That's all
yeah,
you've got. After that,
yeah.
thank you very much. We can move on. We'll come back tomorrow.
Yeah, but you know, David, also, just to give you an insight into our lives, I saw these lions, not these, but their ancestors. We call these particular lions the marsh pride, because
Right.
the center, the heart of their dry season territory is Musiara Marsh. And we have a little stone cottage at Governor's Camp, which is in marshland territory. And so the beauty for us, and I think it makes a difference when you're photographing them, is we know that I can tell you their names. So this front one is called Red. She's slightly darker. And the one behind her, looking a little bit cowed, if I'm reading her body language, you see how her ears are a little bit down, almost as if she's a bit callow, a bit cowed, you know, not as confident. Whereas the one in the front, Red, very confident. So Red is in the front, behind her is Spot. Now, each of these lions, their fingerprint is that whisker spot marking on their face. It never changes from the time a lion is born until it dies. Now, you can have a lion that you think you know, and then suddenly you see it and it's missing an eye, and you think, oh my God, it doesn't look the same. You know, you can't definitely identify a lion because it's got an eye missing or it's got a tail missing. But those whisker spot markings, and you take a photograph from the front, from left and right, you have an identification file, and then you absolutely, and I tell you, you get some amazing insights. Maybe 5 years later, you find a male or a female in a totally different area, you know, and it's just like, God, you know, and you would say, oh, it's another lion, you know, you don't recognize her, you haven't seen her for so long. Look at the whisker spot pattern and the fun, you know, the sort of enjoyment that you get when you recognize an old friend. And we often say to people, we know some of these lions better than our friends. You know, we see more of them.
I suppose the most famous from that area is Scar.
And can you believe it, David? We came across him as a 4-year-old. And when he, with 4 chums, so all relatives, we called them the 4 Musketeers. They came into the marsh, took over the Pride territory, 2011. That old boy, with his eye now completely trashed, he's now 13 years old, which is very, you know how we do the sort of cat's years against human years? You times it by 7, so 13 times 7, he's 91 years old. He even makes me feel young.
That is old for a lion, and specifically the males, because they normally fight for territory, and that's when they get killed.
Exactly, and they get pushed out. You know, the 4-year-olds are the young, tough,
Yeah.
You know, you might get an old guy who used to be a world champion boxer, but he's now in his 80s and he still thinks he can, you know, knock anybody flat. Well, I can tell you, you get a bunch of young guys. I've seen it with an older lion. You look at the older lion and you think, my God, he's going to eat these youngsters alive. Not a bit of it.
Yeah.
They are so pumped with testosterone. And as these males begin to lose condition, as they get older and they sustain injuries, the testosterone level begins to drop. And the younger guys, they've got everything's in it for them to challenge. Whereas for the older guys, it's like, well, you know, maybe we just make ourselves scarce and maybe we just turn tail and get out of here, which they
Been
do.
there,
And of
done
course,
that. We don't need to fight for anything.
no, no. Oh, I love this. This shot of Angie's. Look at that.
What was this at a kill? Because it looks like there's a small piece of something on the forehead there.
Yeah, but you know, it's interesting that you've picked up on that because yes, he's had his head down in the meat, but actually what that is, these three males were suffering from a mite infestation that I know you'll have heard of called mange.
Yes.
And you know, cheetahs, particularly if they're stressed and they have low immune function, their cortisol levels, you know, they're so stressed, their cortisone levels, and these were three, a coalition of three who were quite a handful, but they got mange. And what tends to happen with these cats, whether it's lions, leopards, or cheetahs, often they have the mite, which originally comes from domestic animals in the surrounding area, but they generally can tolerate the mite without it doing too much harm. But if they become stressed, low condition, undernutrition, stressed by competition, then the mites begin to get the upper hand.
Okay.
And then they get sores and incrustations of the skin and they scratch the hell out of themselves. And these, can you see the edges of his ear? How the edges of his ear sort of ragged? Yeah, they had mange. That's a good spot on your part.
And then this is one of my favorites. Jonathan, before you say anything, can I ask you not to, you leap into your camera and I lose your eyes.
Okay, no.
I know you're very excited about telling the story, but I think the viewers want to see your face as well. So sit where you are and get excited from that position.
Right. Okay. I love this picture. So this lioness was called Charm, and she was one of the characters from Big Cat Diary days. And she was part of a group of three young females born in the Marsh Pride, who we called the Three Graces. But they were surplus to requirements in terms of the balance of power within the pride, because the territory is owned by the females.
Right.
So the female lineage, the territory is passed down through this ascending level of sisterhood. So you've got grannies, you've got aunts, you've got mothers, you've got daughters, half sisters, you've got cousins. Sometimes you will, because these animals live a long time, we just talked about Scar, 13 years old. Some of these lionesses, one of them, her relative lived, and she only died then because she was poisoned, BB, she was 17 years old. So you can imagine a lioness starts breeding at 4. So this lioness's daughters, for instance, at some point will be trying to breed in the territory for themselves, but there's already too many adults. And then the younger generation often become marginalized. The females don't like to leave, but these three, the Three Graces, including Charm, they were marginalized from the Marsh Pride, and they sort of lived on the periphery. They tried to keep out of trouble. And over the years, as the main group of females, mortality, injured by buffaloes, some died, those three were able to then recruit themselves back into the pride. And Charm, this was Charm in 2017 when we were filming the new television series, Big Cat Tales. You can see it on Animal Planet, on the Discovery Channel. You can get it on iTunes or Amazon Prime. And season 1, 2017. But I mean, look, even if you're a hardened, old, grouchy old bloke, which I know you're not, wouldn't you just look at that cub? You'd just say to yourself,
I know.
Isn't it just extraordinary?
It makes it all worthwhile. You know, I think as photographers and as wildlife enthusiasts, we all look for that shot. And
Absolutely.
and this may well be a shot.
Yeah.
Because I mean it's the composition you couldn't have posed. Was this one of yours or one of
No,
Angie's?
this is Angie, and it's at what is behind her is the remains of a huge fig tree, which is just broken down now, and it's a
Okay.
favorite place. The little cubs can creep in amongst the rubble of the tree. So
Yeah.
these lionesses love it as a den site
You
in the marsh,
yeah.
in Musiara Marsh.
You could not pose a picture better if you tried.
I know.
Do one of those pet photograph sessions and say to her, please, will you lick the one cub and let the other one look straight down the lens of the camera?
David, we posted this. We posted this on Jonathan and Angela Scott Facebook just before the launch of the Kickstarter.
Right.
It had over 80,000 likes.
Wow. I mean, you can't really go wrong with that. Um, back to Sacred Nature, or Volume 2. We were chatting about it. Will
Yeah.
be available in August.
Yes.
This particular tiger, from which reserve in India?
So that particular tiger that was taken in Kanha National Park in
Okay.
Kanha. And of course, one of the things about India which is, problematic for the tiger, is that unlike, you think of the Serengeti, it's 14,000 square kilometers, it's 8,000 square miles. It's the size of the Kruger. It's huge. The Selous in southern Tanzania is the size of Switzerland. The tiger reserves, the forest reserves in India are tiny.
Yeah.
And so the challenge now, and the way they're trying to keep the population genetically viable, is to try to create wildlife corridors between, you mentioned that you went to Pench, one
Yeah.
of the parks. And so between Pench and some of the other reserves, they're trying, but I mean, there is a tide of humanity
Yeah.
with cattle and people wanting to cut the grass and cut wood. And so it's a real challenge. But as somebody said, and this is a real vote of optimism and confidence, the program, the sort of management plan for the India tiger population says that even if one subadult tiger is able to get through between, say, Pench and Ranthambore, or wherever is the nearest other contiguous area, even if one animal gets through from time to time, that will be sufficient to keep the genetic, so as you don't get
Yeah.
inbreeding beyond a degree that it becomes, a real issue.
Problematic. Jonathan, I mean, going back to this monster here, if I can
Yes.
get away from sharing the screen
From
for a moment.
tigers.
I mean, this is enormous. How
Yep.
do you, and Angie for that matter, sit down and edit the images? What did you start off with as images? Because friends of mine, when they did their last book, they started off with 72,000 images and whittled it down to 120, I think, or 100, somewhere around there. And they had to bring in outside help, because they themselves, it was like trying to ditch a child. Which
Yes.
child do you get rid of? Is it the same for you guys, or are you seriously, what's the word I'm looking for? Focused, pun intended, on which ones to get rid of? Are you disciplined enough?
Yeah. So that's a good question. Firstly, we have an archive of, I should think, about 600,000 images, 600,000. And Angie does all the filing and editing, and she uses Lightroom, which you're probably familiar with. But what's interesting about this book is that our son, when he agreed to design the book, because this was 2016, he still had a job. He's now self-employed and working with us, helping manage our business. But he was working for a company called Eventbrite, which manages tickets and whatever. Anyway, he was their creative director, and he loved the idea of the book. And he said, okay, Mom and Dad, he said, but this is going to have to be on my terms. He said, I will design the book, but he said, I have to have a final say on the images. And he said, what I don't want you to give me, I don't want wildlife images. I don't want behavioral images. I want images that speak to you in terms of they bring something about the quality of life, about the character of the landscape or of the individual animal. I don't want a picture of lions mating. I don't want to, I don't want to see a lion yawning. I don't want something which is, there as a reference point to tell you about behavior. I want something that evokes emotion. So that was his starting point. And then secondly, because you almost said it yourself, which is in writing and as journalists, there is this wonderful phrase, which is murder your darlings. Okay. Now, you see, the thing is for photographers, I might get incredibly excited because after 40 years, I finally get a picture of lions attacking a giraffe. Sounds a bit gruesome, but as a photographer and a wildlife person, there's always something you wish, oh God, I'd love to see that. Okay, so now you get your shot and you want to show it to everybody and you're so excited and proud about, my God, look at that. And somebody might say, well, so what?
Yeah.
You've got to actually distance yourself. And that's why so often, I know with National Geographic, there's a lovely lady called Kathy Moran. She's the picture editor. And she says, photographers are great at taking pictures, but they're not necessarily the best people to edit their own work.
Yeah.
So David, he got the whip out. And we had to, I swear to God, we had to murder some darlings. And I don't even know, I'm not even sure I've recovered yet.
Jonathan, it's been such a pleasure talking to you again. It really and truly has. I wish you all the best with the new book. I know it's being published by HRH, which is just up the road.
Yeah.
HPH.
Yes, Heinrich.
At Heinrich. And he and I, as soon as we can sort of lift the lockdown and sit at the same table, rather than sitting across a restaurant from each other, we will definitely get together and chat about it. So once again, thanks for joining me here in Conversation With. I wish you all the very best. I hope that the Mara opens up soon so that you and Angie can get back to what it is that you love doing and that we love watching.
And David, just a final thing, just to send our love to South Africa and all of the wonderful people in that great country.